Here is the literacy learning progression. Similar to the numeracy progression, the literacy progression was developed in consultation with school and curriculum authorities and literacy experts, using available evidence of the learning sequence for students' literacy development. You will notice similarities to the numeracy progression in terms of structure and purpose. The diagram shows the structure of the literacy learning progression. The elements are shown on the outside edge of the circle. The three elements of the literacy progressions are speaking and listening, reading and viewing, and writing. Each of the three elements includes sub-elements. The 5 sub-elements, in bold, creating texts, understanding texts, listening, interacting and speaking, are overarching sub-elements that provide a holistic view of literacy capability and are supported by the detail given in the remaining sub-element. For example, in reading and viewing, the sub-elements of fluency, phonic knowledge and word recognition, and phonological awareness detail skills that underpin the sub-element of understanding text. Due to its importance in literacy development, vocabulary is included within and across sub-elements. When you look at the detail of the progression, you will see dot point indicators that represent the observable behaviours that accompany each sub-element at a particular level. In many of the sub-elements, subheadings have been included to assist teachers by grouping indicators into particular categories of skills. For example, in creating texts, the subheadings of crafting ideas, text forms and features, and vocabulary are used. Connections between different sub-elements and elements in the progression are indicated in brackets. For example, C grammar or C spelling and phonic knowledge and word recognition. This recognises the interconnectedness of literacy skills. The amount of time it takes students to progress is not specified in the progression, since students' literacy develops at different rates. It is also important to remember that the indicators are not prescriptive and do not form a checklist. Let's look at the element of speaking and listening. It has 3 sub-elements: listening, interacting and speaking, which are all overarching sub-elements. The listening sub-element describes how a student becomes increasingly proficient at building meaning from a variety of spoken and audio texts. It includes active listening processes to access and understand the increasingly sophisticated language structures of spoken texts for audience and purposes specific to learning area requirements. Interacting includes the skills of active listening, strategic and respectful questioning, and using language to share information and negotiate meaning and outcomes. Students interact across an increasing range of curriculum contexts and purposes in pair, group, or whole class oral interactions. This sub-element focuses on the development of two-way interaction processes to clarify and create understanding. The sub-element speaking communicates how a student becomes increasingly proficient at selecting language to express and share ideas appropriate to their audience purpose and task. This sub-element includes the development of skills and techniques to demonstrate understanding through fluent, coherent, cohesive speech for audiences and purposes specific to learning areas. The element of reading and viewing has 4 sub-elements. The sub-elements phonological awareness, phonic knowledge and word recognition, and fluency support the overarching sub-element understanding texts. Understanding texts describes how a student becomes increasingly proficient in decoding, using, interacting with, analysing and evaluating texts to build meaning. Texts include components of print, image, sound, animated movements and symbolic representations. Phonological awareness is the term used to describe the awareness of the constituent sounds of spoken words, while phonemic awareness is a part of phonological awareness and is essential for students to understand the relationship between speech and print, and therefore to read and write. Phonic knowledge and word recognition describes how a student becomes increasingly proficient at using letter-sound relationships and visual knowledge as code-breaking skills. You will note that these sub-elements of phonological awareness and phonic knowledge and word recognition are not continued in the diagram beyond a certain point in the student's literacy journey. This reflects the typical acquisition of these constrained skills in the early years of learning as a platform for further literacy development. Fluency describes how a student becomes increasingly faster, smoother, more accurate and expressive in their reading aloud of progressively complex print texts. At higher levels of the progression, students demonstrate comprehension of a text through confident use of intonation, pausing, accuracy and pace. Writing comprises of 5 sub-elements, including the overarching sub-element of creating texts. The creating text sub-element describes holistically how students become increasingly proficient at creating texts for an increasing range of purposes. Students' writing moves from simple representations of concepts and ideas to more abstract and complex representations, in line with the demands of the learning areas. Students' texts may include components of print, image, sound, animations and symbolic representation. When you look at the detail in the progression document, you will note that the structure of the creating text sub-element changes at level 8. From that level, indicators are grouped into 3 broad text purposes: informative, persuasive, and imaginative, to show how language changes for these different purposes. This also acknowledges that different texts are created by students in different curriculum areas. The grammar sub-element describes how a student becomes increasingly proficient at creating written texts with higher levels of grammatical accuracy. Students display an increasing ability to compose coherent and cohesive texts across all areas of the curriculum for a wide range of purposes, making sophisticated choices at the level of the whole text, the sentence, and the word group level. Punctuation describes how a student becomes increasingly proficient using punctuation to ensure clarity and ease of reading in the texts they produce. As students write more complex and technical texts, they will use increasingly complex punctuation to support meaning. The spelling sub-element shows how a student selects and arranges letters to form accurately spelt words. Students develop increasing skill and proficiency in using spelling as a tool to understand and create meaning in texts. At higher levels of the progression, students monitor their own spelling and explain how spelling impacts on meaning. The final sub-element describes how a student uses handwriting and keyboarding skills with increasing speed, accuracy and fluency to compose and edit text or complete tasks for different purposes. It describes how a student develops a fluent, legible handwriting style, beginning with unjoined letters and transitioning to joined handwriting. Let's look at a student work sample to show how we can use the progressions to describe what the student can currently do and to identify target teaching areas to move the student forward. The task we are about to look at is a Year 7 geography task, completed as an in-class short response to a question. As you can see, it addresses syllabus content and outcomes from the Stage 4 Landscapes and Landforms unit, with a focus on the impact of human activities on landscapes. What is the student currently able to do? What are they demonstrating in terms of their writing? Let's focus on a few key aspects. Looking at crafting ideas first of all, we can see that in this informative text, the student is able to develop ideas with details and examples and form these in 2 paragraphs that each have a topic sentence. This matches the indicators at Creating Text Level 9, shown here. In terms of vocabulary, the student uses some learnt discipline-specific terms from geography as described in Creating Text Level 9, such as habitat, extinct, deforestation, species, air quality, and oxygen, as well as specific names of animals. The student also writes mostly in correct, consistent present tense throughout, other than in one instance in the first sentence, and spells all simple words correctly, as well as some more complex and challenging words, following conventions: ruined, build, wallabies, situation, lose, oxygen, matching Creating Text Level 9 indicators. Obviously, there are other aspects that we could comment on, but this should be enough for the purposes of our demonstration to show how the progressions have provided some insight into the students' current literacy skills. We must note here that this is one short task on one day, and there may be aspects that need further investigation through observations and additional work samples before a teacher can determine whether a student can demonstrate particular skills. So where to next for this student? How would we plan and program teaching to address areas of need? In crafting ideas, the student needs teaching around building sentence variety and complexity as described in Creating Text Level 9 and 10, as most sentences are simple or compound, using and but. Where some complexity is attempted, the word because is repeatedly used, or on one occasion the structure is not correct. As well as the creating text sub-element, consulting the indicators for grammar would provide teaching guidance for supporting this student in building complex sentences. Teaching nominalisation and passive voice would also assist this student to establish and maintain a more academic voice, replacing structures like us humans chop down trees just to build, with more formal and passive structures such as deforestation for the purposes of construction, as indicated in Creating Text Level 10 and Grammar Level 7 indicators. In this piece, the student used only simple sentence boundary punctuation, capital letters to start, full stops to finish, some capitalisation for proper nouns, and commas for listing trees, oxygen, animals. And there was inconsistency in applying these conventions. The student also misuses an apostrophe in trees. Looking at indicators from punctuation level 4 onwards in the punctuation sub-element would provide further guidance for teaching. So, we have now seen an illustration of how the progressions can be used to analyse a piece of student work, describe observed skills, and determine subsequent lesson sequences to support student literacy progress.